So I would like to just give you an opportunity to listen to some of Chris's work. This was at an Indigenous content in STEM symposium, STEM being science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, a couple of years ago. The symposium had a number of was a bit of a Q&A with a panel of people, and this was the first question that I wanted to that the panel answer. I'm going to zip forward to Chris's part. You can listen. I'll give you the link for this so you can hear. You can go back and listen to it yourselves. But Warren Mundine, who is the chair of the Indigenous Advisory Council, asked this question: "What is Indigenous physics? Physics is physics." So he was critiquing this attempt by the Australian curriculum that he argued wasn't needed to try and find Indigenous perspectives in mathematics. So he says, what is Indigenous physics? Physics is physics. If we are to compete in a job market, we must learn technology and engineering. The idea that you need to have an Indigenous perspective is silly. The science and maths should be taught properly. I want to see Australian kids learning about Indigenous kinship systems, not paying lip service to Indigenous culture while learning addition and subtraction. Okay, so we're going to flick through to listen to Chris's response.
I think what I want to start with is it's sort of a combination of all that's been spoken about today so far, is that physics, and so for that statement to be true, physics is just physics. You have to accept that it's not part of a cultural practice. And my point of view is that it is. Physics and maths is a cultural practice. And we already heard from Joe Hayson that it's been informed by many cultural backgrounds over the history. So we have this sort of corpus of knowledge that sits there that's been informed by all these different cultural perspectives. And even when it did come to the point where Europeans were, or what we understand through the Australian history, because we got colonised by Britain, so we adopted that European history that we see. Even through some of that history, you will see the influence of how culture comes about scientific discovery as well. And one example that really hit that for me when I was reading, I read that book, E equals MC squared, History of Equation. Is that a populist book? Just while reading on the plane. And that was the first sort of introduction of what Faraday's life was like, because I took more about the personalities within that book. And at that time, Faraday was only a young scientist, and the professor at the time, which his name was Humphreys, I think it was Humphreys? Something
Davy.
like that. Sorry?
Davy.
It was Davy. And he gave him the problem of looking at connecting the forces of electricity and magnetism, because someone done an experiment and couldn't explain why this phenomenon actually existed. The interesting thing about Faraday is that he belonged to a religious sect at the time that actually firmly believed in circular patterns. So from that belief of circular patterns, he used his imagination to sort of come up with what possibly could be happening with electricity and magnetism. So from his different cultural worldview, if you like, or different way of seeing the world, he was able to then set up the connection between that. So if we go down this line that physics is just physics without any of this sort of other cultural input, we can miss out on some of this fruitful stuff. And as Uncle Lewis was trying to say, is that Aboriginal cultures has had a philosophy for over 40,000 years, and a knowledge has been developed over those years, and people don't even really understand what that can offer within this space. We truly don't even understand what we can offer in this space. And the only example that we have at this point in time, I believe, that shows this potential is the story of David Unipen. Just do a little experiment. Has everyone heard of the name David Unipen? Put up your hand if you have. Right up so I can see it. See, this is a good turnout so far. Keep them up. There's a good turnout so far, because most people, like when I say that in Queensland, keep them up. I'm not finished yet. Because when I ask that in Queensland, you get one person put their hand up, perhaps. Now, the reason I'm going to keep your hand up, I want you to then keep your hand up if you were taught that in either primary school or high school. One person.
Yeah, and the $50 note. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So there's one person that knows about, two people knows about Desmond Primary High School. Now, we all know the story of David Unipen, and one of the things that I value about him is the fact that he did he did connect Aboriginal culture and science in a sense, you know. Yeah, he did, not in a sense, he did. And one of those examples that he actually invented the rotary blade for a helicopter, looking at the aerodynamics of the boomerang. So he was taking that essence of both to create this thing that was before its time. And even in his other inventions that he's famous for, which really annoys me a lot even to this day, because he invented the hinge to make the shears driven by mechanical means. So he actually revolutionised the shearing industry. And we all know that Australia's economic development rode off the sheep's back. So David Unipen was the person who made that a reality for Australia. But even to this day, if you Google David Unipen, he is undervalued by the fact that they say he improved the handpiece. That's all they say, they improved the handpiece. That's it, full stop. And even then, that little experiment, we're seeing how much it's not part of our history. So there's this constant silencing of what Aboriginal people can actually offer in this space. So I'm trying to make 2 points here, that physics, science, and maths is a cultural practice, and that cultural worldviews can influence and have a strong influence on how that is developed. And if we keep this monoculture of the mind, if you like, then we're going to lose that.